Hi, I'm Chandra from Adobe. I'm here with Abhijit Bhaduri from India. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, we know businesses are moving extremely fast these days and they're looking to technology to help them achieve that. And we see this rate of adoption really accelerating. But one thing I wanted to get your perspective of is the technology change being matched by the organizational change in terms of culture, design, and things like that.
I think it's infinitely easier to implement technology than to change culture. Okay. So if you really look at what the digital shift really means, is that this is a chance for us to actually put the human being at the center and build work and the organizational processes around it. And this actually means that the culture has to change. Okay. This means leadership styles have to change. This means the way that we work has to change. This means our approach to learning has to change. So it's a number of different things which are coming together. So that's what is making it a lot more complex. Human processes need a lot more time to change and shift.
Okay.
So and this is the gap.
Okay. And do you see, in terms of that gap, how do you see that playing out between, I guess, in our region where we have developed economies and developing economies? How do you see that playing out?
I think in every place, it's really not so much about developing economies or developed, because that's a misleading term. I believe that if you look at the pace of growth of one of the countries, if it is higher than the other and you still call it developing, I mean, that's a misnomer in my mind.
Okay.
What I think is an opportunity to look at is what does it mean for people at the higher end of the economic spectrum versus people at the lower end. And I think that's where the effect is different. In every country, regardless of where you go, the poor live disadvantaged lives. And therefore, the notion of work or changes in that really impact the people at the bottom of the pyramid a lot more sharply than they do people at the top.
Right. Let's talk about that a little bit. Earlier in the day, you mentioned about how the definition of work is, in some countries like India, a sense of identity. So how do you see now things like technology and this rapid wave of automation that's coming, how do you see that impacting that sense of identity?
I think, in collectivist places, one of the important things to look at is that in a place like India, work is a source of identity not just for the worker, but also for the family.
Yes.
So, things, when it happens well for the individual, the whole family celebrates. It's a good thing for them.
Yes.
When things don't work out, when there are layoffs and retrenchments, it impacts not just the sense of worth or identity for the individual, but also the sense of identity for the family. So that's a very big difference between different cultures in Asia versus many other parts of the world. If you look at what that technological shift means is, it's becoming a lot more hyper-connected. So the opportunities that were earlier restricted to urban areas is now also available in other places.
Okay.
Though not as uniformly, but I think that's where the change is really beginning to happen in terms of the way people learn, the way people connect with each other, the way it throws up opportunities for e-commerce, for people who are located in very, very rural areas, for them to access goods and services, which is very well, distributed today thanks to technology. But it also means that, there are changes which are being driven in the workforce, which people may or may not always want.
Yes. Let's come back to a little bit of that technology change you mentioned. In your book that you wrote, The Digital Tsunami, you actually call out it's not really a digital technology change, it's actually a human change. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
If you look at what is it that human beings tend to do in organizations when they're bringing in technology, so far, the changes that have happened have been limited. It's been one technology that you try to bring in, and as you introduce that, you can keep the rest of the organization fairly static and introduce the change only in one particular area. Now what has happened with digital, if you really look at it, the fourth industrial revolution is a convergence of technology simultaneously and at a space and pace which is massively fast. So what you see happening, by the time you realize it, it doesn't give you enough time to react and run away and make changes. That's why it's like the tsunami. It comes at the speed of an aeroplane. When it runs towards you, it's very hard to run away from it.
Yes.
So it will impact lives, it will impact organizations, it will impact choices. But I think what we need to do is to put far more effort into looking at changes in culture and leadership styles and ways of working than just simply looking at it as a technological solution.
Okay. Now, we think about it as a tsunami, as you just said, right, when it comes. So in a recent McKinsey study, they talked about how the rate of adoption and the extent of adoption is really dependent on a myriad of factors, not just the availability of the technology. It's things like regulation, even the differences in capital to labor ratios, and the use cases that will initially be automated. In your opinion, what do you think will help accelerate adoption in our region or hold it back?
I think, first of all, the importance of the governments being able to invest in infrastructure and education in parallel. So I think without that infrastructure, so without that happening, it's difficult to bring in technology and distribute it adequately. Having said that, the opportunities actually scale up dramatically when you look at the way education can be restructured, because the present systems in most countries of the world was designed for a very different day and age.
Okay.
What you really need to do is to actually bring in far more interplay of disciplines, multidisciplinary approach to learning, looking at actually building in far greater diversity in the institutions, and leveraging that to drive the changes in the workplace. So you prepare the workforce far more for the changes in the way of working than what we are doing today. That's an opportunity. A lot of changes are being done by the government. A lot of it is, if you look at the India stack in terms of technology, etc., I mean, it's very competitive. If you look at what's being done for digital payments, it's very competitive. But you can't just have the digital and tech part of it without looking at the human component. And I think that's really the struggle for most economies. How do we bring the change in that system at the same rate as we can do in the technological system?
Yeah, it's a really good point, that human component, right?
It is.
And so as the change starts to materialize, obviously there's a period of transition. And I guess, what's your perspective of, during this period of coexistence, how what's the impact on employees, old and new, I guess? And then, how can organizations better prepare their people and support them for this period of coexistence?
When you look at the world as we are going to experience in the next couple of years, you will see, an and world, A&D, and, because you will see digital and human coexisting. The challenges in each of these areas will coexist. If you look at simple thing like books, it's not as if, when you have digital readers, e-readers, that the physical books have disappeared. They coexist. The challenging times are always the and times, because there's not one system that is uniform that can be understood. You teach people, they need to straddle both the universes. So, for example, in a place like India, if you have driverless cars being introduced at a time when maybe 10% of the cars are driverless and the other 90 are being driven by humans, how are traffic regulations going to be managed at those points of time are going to be important considerations for people to think about. So how do you introduce technology is as important as the technology itself. How do you educate people to leverage it?
Yes.
So those are the pieces where education of the masses becomes very important. So I think it is that element of the and times that is going to be really challenging.
Okay. When we think about the different parts of the labor force, the way they're impacted by this technology and automation will be different. One particular group in particular, I refer to them as the mid-career group, those that have been in the workforce for a while, educated some time ago, but now think about how they remain relevant for the next phase of their career. What advice would you give, firstly, to these mid-career employees, and what advice would you give to organizations to help these employees adapt?
I think, if you see what really has happened is education used to be in a three-stage kind of a phase. You learn, you earn, and you retire.
Yes.
That's how, so education became the means of earning a livelihood.
Yes.
If you take that away, instead of saying that the person is educated, which means, a degree referred to the end of education. Actually, today, degree is really, it means that now you're ready to learn further on your own. So there is an assisted learning process which the degrees offer you through educational institutions. And then there's a piece that you have to learn on your own. I think people struggle with the second part of it because we've never really needed to do that. And therefore, it's about learning in a manner which we are not used to. And that is why you find a lot of people, they start to fall behind because organizations have started to drive productivity by making people, work longer hours. Technology makes it possible for people to work longer hours. They don't need to be working in the office. It can be anywhere else. But what it also means is that it leaves very little time for people to reflect, think about it, learn, pick up new skills, try it out in the workplace. So creating that white space during the workday becomes probably one of the best ways in which you can introduce learning culture and drive innovation.
Right.
What people need to do as individuals, they need to really start thinking of themselves as a collection of skills that they can bring to the marketplace, and to start looking at companies like platforms. That companies are like platforms where you bring your skills to be monetized. The more current, the more attractive your skills are, the greater the impact of the skills on the number of people, the greater value you get out of it. So the marketplace has really changed because in an open talent economy like we are in today, the work can be divided into different little pieces and can be shipped to any part of the world because electronically it's possible to do that work everywhere. You don't need to be inside an organization. So the way people need to learn and work is going to be very different. So I think that is a very fundamental shift. Above all, one other thing that is happening is people are living much longer. Therefore, they need to extend their working life far more than what they've needed to do in the past.
Yes.
Which also means that they need to become, freshly qualified ever so often.
Yes.
So it's not an end point, it's just ongoing.
Right, it's really interesting because it's giving employees have to relearn how to learn, and organizations have to help them and give them the time to relearn how to learn and to do that frequently.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.